For the past few years, I've been living in a quiet condominium complex located on the outskirts of a medium-sized city in the United States. It's the kind of place where residents greet each other with polite nods in the elevator, and children occasionally ride bicycles in the small courtyard out front. The property is overseen by the Maple Hills Homeowners Association, known for meticulously and sometimes obsessively maintaining the rules. Everything from garbage disposal schedules to the color palettes allowed on our front doors. A few months ago, our condominium corridor, a long hallway lined with beige carpeting and overhead lighting that flickers ominously at night, became the battleground for a peculiar war. The instigator? Carolyn Varnett, though the entire building refers to her by the behind-her-back nickname, Karen. Karen is in her 50s, with hair usually styled in a neat bob and a penchant for wearing pastel suits that give her a businesslike yet oddly officious air. In official HOA records, she holds the position of resident compliance liaison, but in reality, she has crowned herself Queen of Maple Hills. She's the first to point out a stray doormat that doesn't conform to the earth tone-only rule or a potted plant that obstructs the uniform aesthetic. She's never shy about addressing concerns, typically via typed letters taped to doors, always signed with her flourish. C. Varnett, RCL, HOA. For all her micromanagement, Karen never directly confronted me, until she embarked on her latest pet project, turning our building's shared hallway into her personal art gallery. At first, it was a small notice in the complex newsletter. Attention! Plans for a community art exhibition to grace our hallway. The piece was accompanied by a photo of Karen standing by a blank wall, arms crossed, smiling proudly. It read like a nice idea. Local art decorating the bare corridor, perhaps brightening the space. A few neighbors shrugged and went about their business. Little did they know that Karen's version of community art was something else entirely. Within days, she put up framed photographs, all of them featuring herself. Some were standard portraits, as though taken by a semi-professional photographer. Others depicted her in elaborate poses, wearing formal gowns in front of scenic backdrops. Mountaintops, beaches, even a waterfall. It was jarring to step out of the elevator and be greeted by a giant shot of Karen in a glittery dress, gazing into the distance with a regal expression. Just beneath each photo, a brass nameplate read, "Curated by C. Varnett." She never once asked for other residents' input or contributions. Instead, she circulated a memo claiming that a unique aesthetic perspective was necessary to uplift the communal spirit. If the hallway had once been bland, it was now bizarre, transformed into a shrine dedicated to a single person's vanity. And that was merely the beginning of the conflict. As soon as Karen's gallery went up, I started hearing hushed complaints. My next-door neighbor, a friendly retired librarian named Marjorie, muttered about how she felt uncomfortable walking past those giant glam shots every day. Another resident, Andre, a middle-aged father of two, joked that his kids were having nightmares of the glittery lady. But few dared to challenge Karen. She was, after all, the self-proclaimed compliance guru, and people feared her retribution. I couldn't help but cringe each time I walked down the corridor. The photos were, well, over the top. It was like stepping into a museum dedicated to one woman's meticulously airbrushed illusions of grandeur. Even more irritating was Karen's newfound habit of patrolling the hallway, ensuring that no one placed any competing items there. A few neighbors had, over the years, hung small decorative pieces outside their doors, a wreath, a family photo, or a painting done by a grandchild. But one morning, we awoke to discover that all personal decorations were gone, removed by Karen under the guise of maintaining a cohesive gallery theme. She posted a notice explaining that the hallway was now an exhibition zone, thus all unrelated displays were strictly forbidden. Frustrated, I knocked on her door. Karen answered in a pastel pink blazer, hair in a perfect bob. "Oh, hello, dear," she said, with the tone of someone preparing for a confrontation, yet trying to act amiable. I clear my throat. "Karen, I just noticed that the photos outside my door, my kids' artwork, have disappeared. Did you, by chance, remove them?" She folded her arms. "Yes, I did. But let's be clear, I am authorized by the HOA to regulate the hallway's aesthetics. Didn't you receive my newsletter article? We're curating a professional gallery space now, so we can't have random bits of paper taped up, no matter how cute they might be. I bristled. That random bit of paper was my daughter's painting she made for our door. And where exactly is this authorization from the HOA? I haven't seen any official vote on turning the hallway into your personal exhibit. Karen gave a practiced, condescending smile. As the resident compliance liaison, I've been entrusted with significant discretionary powers. If you have concerns, bring them to the next HOA meeting. But for now, the hallway will remain a carefully curated zone. I hope you can appreciate the culture I'm bringing to Maple Hills. With that, she shut her door. I was left in the hallway, my annoyance building. I resolved to do exactly what she suggested. Raise this at the HOA meeting. But something told me that Karen had likely orchestrated everything in a way that would be difficult to challenge formally. After all, she was well versed in the bylaws, and her best weapon was twisting them to her advantage. The monthly Maple Hills HOA meeting took place in a small event room near the building's lobby. It was typically attended by a handful of residents, plus the 3 board members: Karen, resident compliance liaison, Miriam Stone, treasurer, and James Alcott, president, though rather hands-off. On the night of the meeting, I arrived to find about 10 other residents seated in folding chairs, some flipping through an agenda typed up by Karen. The highlight of the printed agenda. Item 3. Community Hallway Gallery Discussion. I breathed a sigh of relief that it was on the list. Good. We'd at least have an open forum to address the gallery. Once the meeting started, James Alcott droned through the usual formalities: finances, upcoming maintenance, a minor mention of newly painted parking lines. Finally, we reached item 3. He paused, then glanced at Karen. Ms. Varnett, I believe you have a presentation on the hallway gallery. Karen stood at the front, flipping open a manila folder. She launched into a rehearsed spiel. The Maple Hills corridor outside Units 2A through 2J is currently undergoing a beautification project. As many of you have seen, I have installed carefully selected photographs to elevate our property's image and highlight creative expression. Naturally, I welcome questions or comments, within reason, about how this helps foster a refined atmosphere for all residents. I raise my hand immediately. I have a question. Why does every piece in the gallery feature you, and only you? And why were other residents' decorations removed without notice? Karen pressed her lips together in a thin smile. For your information, these are not mere selfies. They are professionally taken portraits reflecting a range of thematic visuals, landscapes, formal attire, etc. As for decorations being removed, the hallway is a common area. Our bylaws state that displays or modifications in a common area require explicit HOA approval. She gestured to me. Your daughter's painting was lovely, but it was taped up with no formal process. Hence, I had to remove it for consistency. A few neighbors murmured in disapproval. I spoke again. Is there a reason you didn't first propose a truly communal gallery where different residents could submit art or photos? Karen raised her chin. I'm not opposed to community art, but in my role, I must ensure a certain quality and uniformity. My professional photos meet that standard, whereas random items from neighbors might not. We can't just have the hallway look like a messy collage, can we? She flashed a brittle smile. If anyone has pieces that match the aesthetic style, tasteful, framed, thematically cohesive, I might consider them in the future. I glanced around, noticing people's weary expressions. Some wanted to argue, but it seemed they worried about incurring Karen's wrath. Finally, James cleared his throat. We do have the ability to host a community display, yes. But Ms. Varnett's point is that typically, any decoration in common spaces requires prior board approval. He looked at me apologetically. We might need a formal submission process if others wish to contribute. Karen nodded vigorously. Yes, precisely. In the meantime, the current display will remain until replaced or supplemented by equally professional artwork. I sighed. The entire conversation felt rigged in her favor. Karen had hammered home the bylaws, ignoring the real issue, that was basically a vanity exhibit. The meeting ended with no resolution except a vague promise that others could apply to hang their works. As I left, I overheard Karen telling James how she'd maintain the integrity of the exhibit. My frustration only deepened. Later that week, as I was walking down the hallway, still lined with Karen's over-the-top photos, I spotted a small sign she'd placed by the elevator, "Public Art in Progress," a Maple Hills exhibit curated by C. Varnett. She'd type it on fancy cardstock, complete with gold trim. It struck me that she was trying to lend her exhibit an air of legitimacy. Public art, indeed, yet it was purely about her. I couldn't help but think of how much more meaningful a true display of Maple Hills life would be. Photographs that captured real neighborly moments. Children playing in the courtyard, neighbors chatting in the lobby, the annual potluck party. Something that actually reflected our community, not just Karen's glamour shots. That's when the spark of an idea took hold. If Karen wanted to insist that the corridor was public art, and if the HOA's stance was that anyone could contribute as long as they met some baseline standard, why not take her at her word? Rather than throw a direct confrontation, where she might use bylaws to block me, I could approach it from a sly angle. I'd create my own series of framed photographs showcasing everyday moments and see if she'd dare to say no. But if I was going to make this work, I needed to ensure the photos looked professional. I had a decent digital camera and a knack for editing. With enough care, I could produce prints that rivaled any of Karen's staged portraits in quality, albeit with a drastically different subject matter. The next weekend, I took my camera and wandered around the complex. My goal was to capture the heart of Maple Hills, not forced or staged images, but real, candid slices of life. Of course, I asked people's permission before taking pictures, especially if their kids were in the frame. Most folks were excited about my plan, especially once I explained it was for a prospective hallway gallery. They joked, "Let's see if Karen tries to reject this." Some of my favorite shots included Marjorie sitting on a bench, reading a novel in the afternoon sunlight. Andre's children blowing bubbles near the flower beds, pure joy on their faces. A group of neighbors sharing homemade snacks at a potluck in the lobby. The maintenance guy, Mike, diligently repainting the lines in the parking lot. Sunset reflections on the building's glass doors, capturing the soft, warm glow. I spent hours editing the pictures, adjusting lighting and color balance so they looked polished. Then I found a local print shop that produced high-resolution images on glossy paper. Next, I framed each photograph in a uniform black border. No cheap plastic frames, but solid wood. I wanted zero excuses for Karen to call them unprofessional. Finally, I typed small labels, each reading, "Real Life at Maple Hills," photographed by my name, part of the Maple Hills Community Exhibit. I printed them on cardstock. My ultimate goal, to hang these side by side with Karen's glamour shots, forcing a striking contrast between self-indulgent images and genuine community moments. Just as Karen had said at the HOA meeting, any corridor display required formal permission. So I decided to follow the rules to the letter. I compiled a short proposal. Proposal for additions to the Maple Hills Hallway Gallery. Submitted by my name. Description: a set of framed photographs depicting daily life and neighborly interactions at Maple Hills, intended to complement the current exhibit. All frames are of uniform design, with minimal text labels. Purpose: to reflect a broader sense of community involvement and authenticity. Compliance check: frames and prints meet professional standards. Images are rated family-friendly, with permission granted by any photographed individuals. Thank you for considering these pieces as a valuable addition to the Maple Hills Public Gallery. Signed, my name. I printed 3 copies for Karen, for James, and for the association records, and slid them under the HOA office door, along with a note that they could contact me with any questions. I fully expected Karen to try and sabotage my plan, but I also felt confident I had followed every bylaw. She'd have to concoct a very specific reason to reject community photos that showcased Maple Hills residents in a positive light. Days went by with no response. I anticipated a formal letter from Karen explaining why my submission was unsuitable. But surprisingly, it never came. Instead, I receive an email from James Alcott, the HOA president. Subject: Your hallway gallery proposal. Hello, my name. Thank you for submitting your proposal. We discussed it at our informal board gathering last night. The general consensus is that your photos meet the professional standard described in the guidelines. Therefore, you have the board's permission to proceed with displaying them. Please coordinate placement with Ms. Varnett, C-Seat, to maintain spacing and avoid overcrowding. Best regards, James Alcott, HOA President. Below the signature was a brief line from Karen herself, though it wasn't quite a direct signature, just her typed name. Karen C. Varnett, RCL, HOA acknowledged. The email's subdued tone told me she likely wasn't thrilled, but apparently she couldn't find a legitimate reason to veto it. Perhaps James had insisted on fairness, or maybe she thought that letting me hang my photos would be harmless. Little did she know I had a plan for how best to present them. With official approval in hand, I didn't waste time. On a Saturday morning, I carried my framed images down to the hallway. A couple of neighbors gathered to watch, curious about how everything would look. I found empty wall space between some of Karen's more ostentatious portraits, particularly the ones featuring her in a sequin dress by a faux Hollywood backdrop, and carefully hung my own frames in an orderly pattern. I took great care with alignment, measuring to ensure each frame was straight. The hallway was soon transformed into a sharp juxtaposition of two radically different worlds. Karen's images, staged, glamorous, featuring her in outlandish outfits against exotic landscapes. My images, candid, warm, highlighting real folks from our building enjoying normal life moments. Each new photo was labeled, "Real Life at Maple Hills," with a short descriptive caption. For instance, under the shot of Andre's kids blowing bubbles, I wrote, "Children at play, our neighbors enjoying a sunny Saturday." The difference in tone was striking. Karen's photos screamed self-promotion. Mine told stories of community. By midday, I'd filled the hallway with about 8 of my pictures, spaced evenly. A small crowd of residents had gathered to admire them, occasionally chuckling at how normal, even mundane, the images were, yet how genuine they looked next to Karen's flamboyant portraits. "She's not going to like this," Marjorie whispered to me, but I shrugged. "We follow the rules," I reminded her. "She'll have to accept it or risk looking like she's banning real Maple Hills moments while promoting only herself." That afternoon, I was about to head out for groceries when I heard a sharp knock on my door. I opened it to find Karen standing there, arms folded tightly, wearing a pinched expression. She was clearly seething. "How dare you undermine the aesthetic concept of the gallery?" she hissed, her voice trembling with anger. "These pictures are so ordinary. They clash with the atmosphere I've created." I stepped onto my doormat, meeting her glare. "Karen, I got approval from the board, including you. I made sure these photos were framed professionally, just like you asked." She jabbed a finger at me. "That doesn't mean I expected you to turn the hallway into some kind of candid photo documentary. It's supposed to be a refined, cohesive space, not a random scrapbook. My exhibit is about artistic expression. Yours, it's just snapshots of people doing everyday things." I resisted the urge to laugh at the sheer absurdity of her complaint. Aren't everyday people the heart of our community? The hallway is public, so it should reflect everyone's experiences, right? She stamped her foot. "You're making me look foolish, hanging these next to my professional portraits. It ruins the entire vibe." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not responsible for how anyone interprets your photos. The fact that these real-life images highlight the rest of Maple Hills is a good thing, Karen. If you had asked the community to submit their own works from the start, none of this would be surprising to you." She glowered at me, clearly furious but struggling to form a rebuttal. Then she snapped, "You'll regret this. I'll find a reason to have them taken down." I crossed my arms. "Go for it. But remember, you signed off on them. So if you try to remove them now, you'll have to justify it to the entire HOA board, and possibly every neighbor who's thrilled to see themselves represented in a real community display." Karen's face flushed, and for a moment, I wondered if she might physically tear the photos off the wall then and there. Instead, she spun on her heel and stormed away, muttering under her breath. I closed my door, feeling a surge of exhilaration. Yes, this would undoubtedly escalate, but for once I had the moral and bureaucratic high ground. Over the next few days, the corridor turned into an unlikely tourist spot. Neighbors strolled through, commenting on the pictures and comparing Karen's glamorous poses to the down-to-earth scenes in mine. Whispers circulated about how Karen's pictures look so fake, while the community ones feel authentic and friendly. Even some visitors, friends, or extended family members of residents would pause to admire the gallery, praising the realism of the everyday shots. I overheard a snippet of conversation between two older residents. Resin, those photos of her in that ball gown, did she actually travel to all those places? Or are they photoshopped? Resident B, I'm pretty sure they're green screen. Look at how the light hits her hair. It's unnatural. Meanwhile, a group of teenagers in the building started a running joke, pointing at Karen's portraits and giving them silly nicknames like Queen of Maple Hills, Lord of the Waterfall, or Madam Sparkle. The more Karen tried to portray herself as a cultured sophisticate, the more the entire building saw it as pretentious and comical. As for my photos, they drew genuine compliments. Andre said his kids loved seeing themselves, giggling every time they passed the Bubbles photo. Marjorie was flattered by her picture. She told me it made her feel included, that her quiet reading hobby was now part of a collective story. Even Mike the maintenance guy gave me a friendly thumbs up, grateful for the recognition of his hard work. Of course, Karen despised every bit of this. Several times a day, she walked the corridor, scowling at my frames. But I'd hung them with sturdy hardware, so taking them down would require a blatant act of sabotage. Short of that, she was stuck with them. Karen, being Karen, didn't let the situation rest. One evening, I found a typed note slipped under my door. Notice of non-compliance. Resident, my name. Upon recent inspection, I suspect that your displayed photos may not meet certain safety standards mandated by Maple Hills bylaws. Section 4.2.1. Specifically, the frames could pose a hazard if not affixed with approved hardware or if they exceed the maximum weight limit. Please provide proof of safe installation or remove them immediately to avoid further action. Signed, Karen C. Varnett Farnett, RCL, HOA. It was the flimsiest claim I'd ever seen. She was citing a rule about no heavy fixtures in common areas without board approval, but we'd already addressed that in my initial proposal. I had used standard picture hangers rated well above the frame's weight. Nonetheless, I dutifully collected receipts and took photos of the hardware. Then I emailed the board, copying Karen. Hello, HOA board. I have received a notice of non-compliance from Ms. Farnett regarding the frames I hung in the corridor. Attached are photos of my hardware and copies of the packaging, confirming that each hanger can safely support more than twice the weight of the frames. Please advise if there is any further documentation needed. Thank you. My name, James promptly replied, thanking me for the thorough evidence and stating that my display was indeed compliant. Karen was thus thwarted. Next, she tried nitpicking the content of the photos themselves. In one image, a resident was wearing a t-shirt with a small cartoon graphic, and Karen alleged it might infringe on intellectual property. Again, the board dismissed the complaint, saying it was a harmless, everyday shot with no brand logos. Each attempt Karen made to undermine my photos crumbled under scrutiny. It was almost comical how desperate she was to find a reason, any reason, to tear them down. Meanwhile, the more she protested, the more suspicious other residents became of her motives. With tension brewing, a local news outlet got wind of the unusual hallway art battle. The condo complex's front desk fielded a phone call from a curious reporter who had heard rumors that someone turned a condo corridor into their personal vanity show, and neighbors fought back with a real-life photo exhibit. One Sunday afternoon, a reporter named Elena Gomez stopped by for interviews. She chatted with me, marveled at the contrasting displays, and snapped pictures of the hallway's two competing galleries. A short segment aired on the local news, showing clips of Karen's glam shots and my everyday community photos. The piece ran under the playful headline, Glamour versus Reality, Condo Residents and Hallway Art Showdown. The story made Karen livid. She despised being portrayed as the out-of-touch Karen figure, though the news didn't call her that nickname on air. She apparently confronted the reporter, demanding they pull the story, but it was too late. The station had already aired it. In a tragicomic twist, though Karen had initially wanted to be admired for her cultural contribution, she now realized she'd become a local punchline. At the same time, Maple Hills suddenly attracted a flicker of attention from passersby who recognized the story and asked if they could see the hallway in person. The board politely discouraged outside visitors. This wasn't meant to be a public amusement. Nonetheless, a few curious folks did manage to come in under the guise of visiting friends, occasionally snapping pictures of the corridor's bizarre clash of aesthetics. Every so often, I'd hear them stifle laughs at the extravagance of Karen's portraits. Under normal circumstances, Karen would never back down. She was known for her unwavering self-righteousness. But the combined weight of neighborly disapproval, the humiliating local news coverage, and the unstoppable presence of my sanctioned photo exhibit seemed to be wearing her down. One day, I noticed that a couple of her most ostentatious frames, particularly the one with the glittery gown in front of the fake Eiffel Tower, had been taken down. In their place, the wall was conspicuously bare. At first, I thought maybe they'd fallen, but the nails and hooks were still there. It was as if Karen had decided to quietly remove the more embarrassing pieces. Later, I ran into Marjorie, who'd just seen Karen pacing up and down the hallway with a sour expression. She had a cart, Marjorie confided. Looked like she was taking some photos off the walls. Probably can't handle the side-by-side comparison. Over the next week, more of Karen's pictures disappeared. By the time she was finished, only a small handful of her more conservative shots remained. Images of her in a simple blouse or jacket with neutral backgrounds. The lavish ones were gone. It was almost anticlimactic. We'd all expected a massive blow-up, but it seemed she was simply retreating from the embarrassment. My neighbors and I wondered, would she also try to remove my exhibit? But given the board's stance, she couldn't do so legally. And after the fiasco, she likely preferred not to draw further attention to the difference between her vanity shots and our real community photos. A few days later, the monthly HOA meeting arrived. The first one since the corridor drama had become local gossip. The event room was packed with curious neighbors. Even those who usually skipped HOA proceedings showed up, anticipating some fireworks. Karen sat at the board table, fidgeting with her pen, looking tense. James began the meeting with the usual announcements. Then came the agenda item about hallway art exhibit updates. He glanced at Karen. Ms. Farnett, I believe you had some statements prepared. Karen cleared her throat, scanning the crowd. She seemed smaller, somehow, less certain of her authority. Yes, thank you, she began in a subdued voice. Regarding the hallway exhibit, I recognize there has been some controversy. I'd like to note that I never intended to impose a singular artistic vision on the entire building. She paused, as if searching for the right words. But in the spirit of community unity, I've decided to scale back my personal photos. Anyone wishing to display suitable artwork or photography in compliance with board guidelines is welcome to submit for approval. A wave of incredulous expressions passed through the room. Karen was effectively admitting that the corridor was for the community, not just her. This was about as close to an apology as we would ever get from her. James looked relieved. Thank you, Ms. Farnett. We certainly appreciate your willingness to accommodate multiple perspectives. The board will continue to review any new submissions, ensuring they meet safety and quality standards. He offered a small nod in my direction. Karen laced her fingers together. Also, she added in a low voice, I'd like to thank the residents who provided thoughtful photographs of daily life in Maple Hills. It adds warmth to the hallway. There was a soft chorus of approval and even some applause from the audience. I nodded politely, meeting Karen's gaze. Though she didn't smile, she gave a slight incline of her head. A truce of sorts. In the weeks following the meeting, Karen removed nearly all of her flamboyant portraits, leaving just 2 or 3 modest pieces. She never explicitly said why, but everyone suspected she was embarrassed by the local news story and the building-wide chatter. Meanwhile, my photo exhibit stayed up, continuing to delight neighbors who recognized themselves or their friends in the candid moments. A few residents were inspired to submit their own photos. The board approved several, and soon we had a true, eclectic gallery of Maple Hills life. Pictures of holiday celebrations, gardening projects, even a playful shot of Marjorie's cat peering out a window. Without Karen's dominance, the hallway felt more genuine, more welcoming. Instead of stepping into a shrine to one resident's ego, people saw a collective collage of the place we all called home. Karen, for her part, seemed to step back from her role as the unstoppable compliance juggernaut. She remained on the HOA, but with less aggressive micromanagement. Perhaps the entire saga had humbled her. Sometimes I saw her in the corridor, pausing briefly at a photo of a neighbor's baby smiling in a stroller or the shot of Andre's children blowing bubbles. Her expression would flicker, maybe reflecting on the difference between genuine community spirit and hollow vanity. Once she caught me looking. She cleared her throat and said, "Your pictures, they're quite well done," before continuing on her way. It wasn't quite an apology for all the trouble, but it felt like an admission that I'd made my point. And that was how Karen's attempt to turn our hallway into a private art gallery ended. Not with the glorious admiration she'd craved, but with a quiet retreat. In the end, her hypocrisy was exposed by the very logic she used to justify her exhibit. By embracing the rules she demanded and presenting authentic photos of the neighborhood, we showed that real pride in one's community stems from shared moments, not self-indulgent showcases. The corridor is now a small symbol of that lesson. Pictures of neighbors in daily life, side by side with the occasional formal portrait, each granted space by a more inclusive approach. And if a future Karen emerges to claim the hallway as their personal domain, we'll be ready, camera in hand, capturing the true heart of Maple Hills for all to see.